Proyecto dedicado a la divulgación, formación y terapia psicológica. Consulta nuestros servicios en nuestra web y redes sociales.
But they're going to be different in different languages, right? So what about the where I have trouble thinking these kinds of things through is what are the natural things that would be involved if you're talking about the different kinds of phonology you have, say, if somebody's learning Dutch or somebody's learning Japanese or Chinese. In Chinese, you've got the tonal differences, which I have a colleague, actually he's an engineer, but I talked to him, and he's now learning Mandarin. And he's talking about the trouble he's having hearing the tonal differences. There's a little bit of tonal stuff in Norwegian, but not much. In most European languages, we don't worry about it. But each of the children who are being raised in these different communities is getting exposed to different kinds of things. And so what is the universe, when you're saying that these are given somehow,
universal principles.
What are the universals with respect to, say, phonetics, which varies so?
Even with regard to phonetics, the universal principles are very profound. There are very few options among all the sound structures that you can imagine. There's an extremely narrow range of options that the child immediately hits upon to say, this is language. You take a newborn infant, it hears all kinds of noise. For a chimpanzee, that's just noise, it remains noise. But the child instantly, at the very beginning, picks out the parts of the noise that are language related. And
maybe even prenatally, I understand.
Them in kind of a fixed structure of possible phonological structures. So take the Japanese English case. By about 10 months, a Japanese infant no longer distinguishes R and L. And by about the same period, an English-speaking influence doesn't distinguish Arabic emphatic, non-emphatic consonants. All of this stuff works.
Or the B versus P in Arabic, right?
Yeah, right. All of this goes by a pre-programmed innate structure, very similar to a child acquiring the ability to walk. We don't say a child learns to walk. It just develops walking as part of its maturational development. And very much the same seems to be true of development of even phonetics. When you get into grammatical structure and like that, the universals are far deeper and the possible ranges are far left. By now it's becoming.
And somehow what troubles me there is that the nature of those universals is kind of strange, because after all, you've got the diaphragm, the lungs, the vocal cords, the lips, the teeth, to start saying all of these kinds of things and to make those different sounds. It's such a complex set of coordinations. The timing matters, because when you're starting to exhale, it's going to be a while before the air gets to those places, and somehow that's got to be shaped up. I've looked into a bit of the developmental phonology, and I also used to be involved with a group that was a European group in which I mentioned Dutch in particular because there was this one Dutch linguist who said that there are some kinds of sounds in Dutch that the kids don't end up getting right until they're 8 or 9 years old. Maybe he's wrong, but he was a Dutch native speaker and he was a linguist. He was concerned with phonology.
Established much earlier. There are some cases of grammatical structures, pretty complex ones, that children don't really get fixed properly until about 8 or 9. But not phonetics. That's just said immediately. And notice, incidentally, that the phonetics is basically irrelevant to language. A deaf child will learn sign, no phonetics, and have perfectly competent language. The if you look at the way we now pretty well understand that what we call language has two almost totally different components. One part is an internal computational system, which basically yields what we call meaning, basically yields thought. Our thoughts are just constructed by fixed internal principles of grammatical structure. Then there's a second part that we call language, which is externalization, mapping this internal thing into some sensory motor medium. But that's quite separate. If you want an analogy, it's something like you have a computer program in your laptop, maybe for calculation. You can hook it up to one or another printer. The internal system doesn't care what printer you hook it up to. Seems to be pretty much the way language works. The internal system is just fixed, coded internally. You have no conscious awareness of it. It's all going on inaccessible to consciousness. And then it gets externalized into one or another sensory motor medium, usually sound, can be sight, can even be touch. It's not smell because we don't have enough.
See if I'm following this. Would it be, and if you're talking, say, about locomotion, and you're looking at the different gaits in a horse's locomotion, it could be trotting, it could be galloping, it could be, and there are certain kinds of coordinations among the legs and the muscles with respect to the individual limbs. And there are some things that it wouldn't naturally do that you can maybe get it to do, like to get the lipizzaners to do these funny steps. But presumably there are going to be other steps that are just totally, let's say, ungrammatical with respect to horses' locomotion. So would we say that the nervous system is built in such a way to allow certain classes of coordinations, which maybe you could come up with some mathematical descriptions of? And that's totally different from the question of when the horse is going to switch from one gait to another and where it's going to go. Is that would that be analogous to the kind of difference you're talking about between the internal and the external with respect to language?
Well, you remember that was one of Lashley's main examples, gait of horses, showing that there's only certain options available. You can gallop, you can, I forget what the other names are called, canter and so on. But this is just...
I might have been just showing off that I did remember a little Ashley.
But notice that all of this is externalization. In the case of language, there's a lot of structure to the sensory motor systems. The visual and gestural systems have their own structure. The articulatory system has its own structure. The perceptual auditory system has its own structure. None of this has anything to do with language. All of these systems were in place long before language ever emerged, and they haven't changed at all with the appearance of language. So these are just like a printer attached to your laptop. They're basically they're non-linguistic systems. In fact, even the fact that language is produced word after word has nothing to do with language. The internal system is unordered. You can show that. The internal system that generates thoughts has no order. The order is imposed by a non-linguistic articulatory system, which is unable to produce structures, so it has to produce them word by word. Process of linearization actually is outside of language. It's a property of sensory motor systems that were there long before language appeared and have no...
So language emerged when, do you suppose?
Gracias por ver este vídeo, os dejamos por aquí un enlace a nuestra última formación y por aquí algunos vídeos que os pueden resultar de interés. Si estáis buscando ayuda psicológica, también podéis mirar en la descripción del vídeo donde encontraréis nuestra web y podréis solicitar asistencia terapéutica de un profesional confiable y que os ofrecerá ayuda psicológica basada en evidencia científica.